lately I've been seeing in the community this sort of growing, I don't know if it's like complaint? I think it's like a growing complaint or like a growing concern of like, there's too many ride lines. And I've been saying this for a long time, but I think I think we will have more than 100 ride lines fairly soon, maybe in like the next year, 2 years or so, with lyrical included and all that stuff. And in my opinion, that is a good thing, because unlike clans, it is very easy to provide upkeep to ride lines to keep them relevant. And what I mean by that is like, there are two ways about that, basically, where either a deck becomes so good that it simply doesn't need support. Like, for example, Bastion doesn't really need support right now. Like, the thing is, it doesn't need any direct support because it's already a really, really good deck to the point of God of Restriction. And you can make Bastion support without it being Bastion support. And what I mean by that is that any good grade 3 is Bastion support. Or think about Barrow. Barrow doesn't need actual support because this new Direful doll is Barrow support, right? It doesn't say Barrow anywhere in its card text, but it supports Barrow because it supports Barrow's playstyle. And overall, Bushiroad has been quite good in designing these ride lines where they each have their own gimmick, but they have a gimmick that can be supported without necessarily printing a card that says if your Vanguard is X grade 3. And that's why I think we can easily go to 100, 200, 500 ride lines while keeping the nation system and introducing new funky ideas and new interesting playstyles. And every time a new ride line comes out, we will have a booster set focused on supporting that ride line. Right now we're seeing that with all of the new ones, right? So we're seeing that with Heroes, with Leonorn, with the new Nirvana ride line, with Youthberg, with Drejewald, and we're gonna have focus support because every ride line deserves a certain amount of focus support. Whether that's 1 set, 2 sets, 3 sets, 4 sets, you know, basically support it until it's a refined deck, and then once it's refined as a deck, you leave it alone. You leave it alone and give it generic support for the entire nation, or not even the entire nation. You give generic support that supports a partition of that nation that deck belongs to. So for example, we have the new triple rare for Branke that is when you set an order from hand, revive itself from drop, and then 10k power, plus 10k power if you have 2 or more orders set. That does not support Prison, and I think we're all very much aware of that. But it supports Orphist, it supports Ava, it technically can support Heroes, and as a result, you can support old ride lines without necessarily having to support them directly. And we're only a year into overdress and they're already doing this. And like, that's why I think like the argument that there's too many ride lines doesn't really mean much, because there will always be too many ride lines, because there will always be more ride lines than clans, and they will keep doing this because more ride lines equals more demographic interest, because right now there is no robot ride line, and that is a demographic that they're refusing to touch for the time being. But they can add that and then they will have it. And you know, there's no like Gear Chronicle themed ride line, and that is a demographic they're not touching yet, but they will eventually probably. And there's no like, I don't know, ice themed ride line that a lot of people would love to see, but we might get it in the future, right? And the more ride lines they bring out, the more demographics you touch and more people you bring into the game, because they're like, oh, that's cool. This aesthetic doesn't really exist in other card games, and I think it's really cool, so I can now explore it in Vanguard. And then the people get into it. And then, you know, this new ride line gets support for a few sets, and then after some time it just doesn't get any more support directly, but they bring out something like a Brainwash Swirler or the new Direful doll, and it's like, ooh, my ride line deck that I built from a year ago is even better now with these new cards, and I still want to buy the new set and the new packs and keep investing into the game because they found a way to support my deck without necessarily printing support for it. So I think that, in my opinion, it is fine to have as many ride lines as Bushiroad wants to print, as long as they continue with the current design philosophy of go crazy with specific support for, let's say, I mean, almost a year, right? The set one decks, the year one wave of ride lines was basically supported throughout that entire year plus alpha, where plus alpha, that plus alpha equals until that deck is complete. And then once it's complete, you allow for some of the generic cards to be compatible with that ride line that then support it in a way that is like inclusive for that deck. So yes, Bastion didn't really get any direct support this set, and that's also the thing, doesn't need to be every set. Like, you don't have there is no need to support every deck every set when a deck is already very good. So honestly, I'm perfectly fine if, let's say, set 6 didn't have any prison support. It does have prison support, but if it didn't, I'd be cool with that, because prison feels like a complete deck. There is not much wiggle room in the deck anymore unless they power creep it. But there's no reason to power creep prison because it's already at a very good power level. So that's why the new cards are more like, oh, try out this interesting different strategy instead, right? But then you look at like Eugene, Orphist, Zorga. Orphist and Zorga are a bit different, where they are getting close to that complete level, just like missing a tiny bit of support to bring them a little, like, one step closer, and they're doing a good job with it. The interesting thing is that then we have side grades. So we have two types of side grades. We have one side grade that is Orphist Zorga, where it's just like, okay, we're not going to change the whole ride line, we're going to change the grade 3 that you ride into, where it does something a bit different from the old grade 3, and now you choose what you're going to do with that deck, because you can now build it very differently. So Orphist started putting in more orders, Zorga basically changed playstyle in general, to an extent, but then you have Nirvana, where it's clearly a new deck, because there isn't much more to do with Mahar, because Mahar is already a complete package. So instead they're going to go like, okay, we're going to treat this like Zodiac Time Beasts, where they stop printing generic Gear Chronicle support, or like they stop printing Time Leap support and they started printing Zodiac Time Beast support. So that's basically what Nirvana is. But it's just now a question of like, how often will you do this? Will this be every set? Or like, will this be every season that we have like a side grade? Will certain decks get side grades and some decks will not? Or are we going to have like a Bruce situation where you want to go back from the grade 4 to the grade 3 Persona Ride build and put in the cool new triple rare that supports the deck really well and gives a new build and like a new playstyle to the deck instead? So I think they've been exploring ride lines in a very cool way, and I've seen people be very negative about it on the internet, when I personally feel like it's not really that big of a deal. And they've actually been exploring this design space in a pretty interesting and conductive way. So that is my TED Talk number 2. I hope you enjoyed.